As you saw, Donald Trump is back taking center stage, though the campaign itself, the Trump campaign itself, has been emphasizing that what you just saw is not an official campaign event. We're going to talk about that in a second. Let's bring in Stephen D'Souza, though. He was listening alongside us as Donald Trump again was there on the balcony of the White House addressing members of the public. Looked like, Steve, a few hundred that gathered on the lawn of the White House to listen to the U.S. president. But let's talk about the timing here. You know, just 8 days after Donald Trump was admitted to Walter Reed Hospital, just 5 days after his release, and despite the concerns about his health, despite the concerns about Trump potentially infecting others, he is back. Talk to us about the concerns that surrounded this event and also why Donald Trump is so anxious to be seen by the public again.
You know, we'll start with the concerns about the president's health. We still don't know when he was infected by the coronavirus, whether he's tested negative for the coronavirus. The White House and the president himself both vague on those terms. So as he appeared on that balcony to address the crowd, is he still contagious? Of course, there was a large distance between the president and the crowd, but then when you see the crowd there, even though they're outdoors, they were tightly packed, masks in the crowd, but even just watching this crowd lining up as they were going in earlier, tightly packed, not a lot of masks in the crowd, and a lot of yelling, which health professionals say is perhaps one of the spreaders when people are expelling the virus into the air, and then tightly packed, no physical distancing. So a lot of concerns, especially given the fact that just a couple of weeks ago, there was the event at the White House where they announced the Supreme Court nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, and that is now being called a super spreader because a number of White House officials did test positive for the coronavirus after that. And so you see the president there getting essentially what he wants, which is to address his supporters. And this is something we know that he's been eager to do since he was released from hospital. In the last few days, he hasn't gone out in public, but he did do a number of videos which went on social media and then spoke to some Trump-friendly reporters, including Sean Hannity on Fox News, as well as talking to conservative radio talk show host Mark Levin, and for 2 hours yesterday, Rush Limbaugh. I should point out, it is interesting to see as he spoke today, he did sound relatively healthy. He was coughing and a bit hoarse in one of the interviews with Fox News earlier this week, but did sound relatively healthy, though he did only speak for about 16 minutes, and he did talk in broad, sweeping terms about how healthy he is and how they're going to, in his words, eradicate the virus. Not something health professionals ever talk about. You hear often talk about a vaccine, but not necessarily eradicating the virus. Take a listen to what Trump had to say earlier, including a mention of Canada.
Through the power of the American spirit, I think more than anything else, science, medicine will eradicate the China virus once and for all. We'll get rid of it all over the world. You see big flare-ups in Europe, big flare-ups in Canada, very big flare-up in Canada. You saw that today.
Interestingly, he mentioned Canada because we know that the Prime Minister and the President did have a conversation today, Michael, so perhaps that's why Canada was on his mind during today's speech.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, beyond COVID-19, there was also an address here about policing in the United States and messaging that really was meant to hit the African-American community in the United States as well as the Latino-American community. Evidenced as well, Stephen, when you looked at the crowd and who was in attendance today. Talk to us about that and what stood out for you on that part.
So we're used to seeing the red hats in the crowd for a Donald Trump event. The blue shirts are a little bit different, and those are from a campaign called Blexit, which is Black Exit. It's run by a conservative activist named Candace Owens, who is African-American herself. And the point of her campaign is to show that African-Americans and Latinos don't necessarily have to vote for the Democratic Party by default. And so they were actually hosting an event earlier this morning in Washington, D.C., so it kind of worked out pretty well that there was already a crowd gathered in Washington that could simply come over to the White House for this event. And as you heard, the president did direct his message to the audience, talking about some of the things he's done for the African-American community, as well as one of his key campaign planks aimed at the African-American community, his Platinum Plan, as he calls it, which includes, among other things, about $500 million of investment into that community to help with businesses and other things. And so law and order, again, as you mentioned as well, was a key message that he delivered today. Somewhat opposite of what we've been hearing on the streets from millions of protesters in cities like New York and across the country saying that they want to see police accountability and other things. The police talking Trump talking in the opposite terms, talking about support for police, and that he's saying if African American lives need to be protected, then police need to be protected as well. So interesting that's something that the president sees as an important message for him and directed towards that specific community at his event today.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask our producers upstairs to show us a bit more of the event here, because I also want to talk about the framing here, Steve, because officially this was not a campaign event. That's what we heard from the Trump campaign. But, looks like a duck, quacks like a duck. How is this not a campaign event?
Exactly. The White House earlier today in setting up the event called it a White House event, said these people were invited by the White House. It's not a campaign event. And that is significant because the White House staff and resources can't be used for campaign purposes because it would be a violation of federal law. And so the campaign doesn't want to step across that line. But as you say, it walks like a duck, talks like a duck. I'll just go through some of the topics that the president touched on. And you had the presidential seal on the dais there, so that shows it's being a official White House event. But he talked about China, talked about the wall, globalist Wall Street donors, the need for police, fracking, which is an important message he's been using a lot during his campaign rallies. Talked about the corrupt media, crooked ballots, law enforcement again, draining the swamp, all of these things that you hear at a Trump event. So apart from the fact it only went 16 minutes, this might as well have been a Trump campaign event. Simply calling it a White House event, I don't know if that necessarily appeases anyone who wants to believe this is not one way or the other. So definitely walking a fine line between a campaign event, but especially with polls showing the president down. He mentioned polls in some areas, but didn't mention the national polls, didn't mention polls in places like Pennsylvania. The president does appear to be down, and you can take that with a large grain of salt based on the results in the last election. But the president definitely sees his campaign slagging, wants to get out there for perhaps personal reasons or for definitely campaign reasons. His campaign did announce new events coming up in this coming week. So he's going to be in Florida on Monday, in Pennsylvania amongst a solidly Trump area on Tuesday, and then in Iowa on Wednesday. So he is eager to get back and will be getting out. So we will be seeing more of the president in the coming days. More events like this that you just saw where people, despite all of the guidelines, all of the rules being put in place, still tightly packed. And so we'll see more of the president in the coming days, and we'll see just what we hear more, if any, about just the state of his health as well.
Yes, the state of his health. Also, reaction to this event again at the White House. Donald Trump, of course, was criticized very heavily after appearing at the White House at the end of the RNC, and now here he is, his first public appearance, as you say, with supporters gathered in what sound like a campaign speech. If we can say it's a campaign speech, the doublespeak aside of what they're calling it right now. Stephen, let's thank you for that. We'll see if there's any reaction to all of that today. Our Stephen D'Souza in New York.